Hi there BookTube, so welcome to a new video which is going to be an original tag of mine, and it's going to be the hip hop books tag. So I've got a series of questions all based on hip hop songs. I'll give you a slither, and even if you don't like hip hop, I think you'd recognise a surprising amount of them, because hip hop has so penetrated the culture, not just in music but in advertising and film and just any part of culture you think of, hip hop has sort of penetrated. So these are mainly the well-known artists. I'm a bit old school. I go back to the origins of hip hop, so rather than the contemporary ones like Drake and people like that, who I'm not so familiar with. But you'll be glad to know that, unlike in the punk rock tag, I will not be throwing shapes to them. It will simply be a 10-second snatch of each song and then on with the question. So here we go.
It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going.
So that was Grandmaster Flash and The Message, and Grandmaster Flash is pretty much credited with the first sort of mass breakthrough hip hop song with that song. But anyway, the question is, what book had a message which you just couldn't figure out what it was? So for me it's Martin Amis's Time's Arrow. And the device he uses for this book is that it's backwards moving, so that it's as if time is running backwards. So that it's about the Holocaust. So it's, you start off with ashes in an oven, gas oven, then reconstitute back to people who then walk away from the oven, etc., etc. And it's about a Nazi doctor. That's the sort of the hub of the book. And I just don't understand, apart from the fact I think it's a really trite device to treat the Holocaust with. I don't quite understand what the message is, because obviously the book ends with them sort of as babies going back into their mother's stomachs, back into the womb. So is the message sort of, well, whether you're evil like a Nazi doctor, whether you're an innocent victim like a Holocaust victim, or whether you're just an ordinary person, we're all born the same. We're all born without sin, without evil. If that's the message, it's not terribly startling, and it doesn't really stack up against the horrors of the Holocaust. I know perhaps the point is the banality of evil, the banality of the functionaries who were the Nazis, who ran the death camps and shipped people on trains and stuff, that they were sort of bureaucrats. But this doesn't seem to be a very good way of getting that message across. So for me, I didn't really understand what Amis's point was in that book, and I actually found it sort of quite offensive, really. So that's that one.
The music up and count our money. Yo, but check this out. Yo, Eli, turn the bass down and just let the beat keep on rocking.
So this is Erik B Rakim, paid in full. Which character got their just desserts in the most memorable way? I'm going with Michel Houellebecq's latest book called Submission, which is a brilliant, I think the best of all Houellebecq's books. And as with a lot of them, it's sort of concerned with sort of Muslim fundamentalism and sort of how that sits within sort of French society. Obviously, the last few years there's been a lot of attacks in France by sort of Islamic extremists. Houellebecq has been writing about this sort of stuff for years before we all became familiar with it. But in Submission particularly, the character is an academic who is studying J.K. Huysmans, who was a turn of the 20th century novelist who wrote about decadence. I mean, his famous book is Our Remorse, which I can't remember what that translates as now. But basically it's just sort of sumptuous chapters about sort of fine food, fine decor, fine bits of furniture and all of this. And it's sort of favourably cited by Oscar Wilde and people like that. It's a book about aesthetics, really. But it is very decadent. And the academic in Submission who's studying this, there's a hole in his sort of spiritual centre, and Huysmans sort of represents that. It'd be natural that he'd be studying Huysmans, because the point about aesthetics, if that is your highest pleasure in life, there's nothing. It's all superficial. It's all surface. There's nothing beneath it. So this academic sort of has a crisis of being at the same time at which the Muslim party come to power in France, actually win the election. And they introduce sort of an Islamic law, and that's not a sort of Sharia hard and fast Islamic law, but it does do things such as you either have to convert to Islam to keep your position as a sort of state employee, or you lose your job. So he's faced with, is he going to lose his position as an academic by not converting to Islam, or is he going to do it? And he sort of takes the views of lots of people, some who do convert, some who don't, through the book, and he sort of refracts it back through his own thoughts about his own sort of spiritual emptiness. And the genius of the book is he does end up converting, but not obviously not out of any belief in the faith, not because he wants to save his academic position, but for the love of a Muslim woman, which is perhaps the sort of the least relevant to the whole sort of existentialist questions that he's posing himself. But that's what it comes down to, because in the end he wants a companion, he wants to be loved, and there's this woman behind a burqa, and it's just a brilliant book. So there's sort of an ironic payoff. I mean, he gets his just desserts, but it's by his own choice. It's through his own idleness, really, and his own lack drives him towards that payoff, and it's just a fantastically subversive book.
No sleep till Brooklyn. No sleep till Brooklyn.
So that was the Beastie Boys, No Sleep Till Brooklyn. Which was the last book you read in one sitting or read through the night because you couldn't bring yourself to go to bed? For me, it was Michel Faber's The Book of Strange New Things, which again is just a wonderful, wonderful read. If you told me what it was about before I read it, I'd go, I don't want to read this. It's sort of science fiction, Christianity, all these elements together, which I think, whoa, I don't want to read that. But such is Faber's skill, and it is just a tremendous book. So basically, there's a couple, very, I'd say sort of early middle age, very loving. She's finally got pregnant with their child, and that consummation happened, or that conception happened, the night before he's to leave for a space shot to the other side of the universe, where intelligent life has been discovered, and it's been ongoing, so that the aliens on that planet are they're very taken with Christianity and the Bible. So it's a bit like sort of the cargo cults, where sort of, supposedly, I don't know if this has actually been borne out in fact, because I know it's been sort of debunked and stuff, where sort of undiscovered tribes in the Pacific, when they were discovered and there were sort of planes flying overhead and unloading, whatever the cargo they were, the natives treated these as gods, because obviously they'd never seen airplanes before, and they sort of fetishize, ordinary everyday sort of objects that the plane was unloading. And it's a bit like that for this alien species, about we don't know quite on what level they are responding to the Christianity and all of that. But anyway, so the guy goes off and he goes to this planet, and it's about you can't have a long distance relationship when that distance is the other side of the universe, and the pregnancy is going sort of difficult, and society is falling apart, and she's begging and pleading, why have you abandoned me? Why have you abandoned me for your, to pursue your faith and stuff? And it's, the book works on so many levels. So it's about sort of a marriage, a long-term marriage, and when distance comes between it, physical distance. The alien race are beautifully portrayed. They are genuinely alien. They're completely unthreatening. They're not hostile in any way, but they're so lovingly created by Faber out of his imagination. And it's just a supreme book. And I didn't read it in one sitting because I think it's about 500 pages, but I did sort of read till late in the night, which is quite rare for me.
That's the life that I lead, and you sucker MC is who I be. So take that and move back, catch up.
So that's Run DMC with Sucker MCs. Which main character was the biggest sucker in a novel? So for me, this was Dave Eggers' book The Circle, which is a brilliant satire about the sort of tech, the new tech corporates like Google and Amazon, who had these sort of campuses, and they sort of had their own sort of set of alternative sort of corporate rules and ethics by which their staff are sort of expected to pursue. And the point is, as Eggers points up so beautifully, is they're effectively cults. If you buy into it as an employee, and you're no better than a cult member. So the main character here is offered a job on one of these with this company called The Circle, which is a campus-based corporation by a friend of hers, and she wants to be popular within there. She wants to do well in the company and rise and outstrip the person who offered her the job, which is all sort of standard stuff in any corporation. But in order to do that within The Circle, she has to buy everything through the sort of the pop-ups that come on her screen. There's a sort of social media, you have to do things that get loads of likes, and your sort of whole mindset gradually changes. Initially she sort of unconsciously does things that stick out and don't follow the rules, and gradually she's brought up before the authorities saying no, you've got to do it our way, and gradually she's sort of suckered in to come, because she wants to rise to the top, because she wants to outstrip her mentor who brought her there. She does comply with the rules, and she totally becomes a cult figure, and it's a brilliant sort of portrayal of that.
Wow,
So that was Wild Thing by Tone Loc. Who is the wildest character in a novel, or the wildest novel? So for me, this is Nicholson Baker's House of Holes, which is an over-the-top sort of sex romp, but not between two specific characters. But basically, the House of Holes is a brothel or a bordello, which is sort of phantasmagoric, and the different rooms and the different activities, and it's full of very beautiful people. And to be honest, it's not a very good book. It's very tedious, because it is just sort of sex act after sex act with these perfect bodies. But the one interesting thing about, and it is wild in that sense, but the one interesting thing about the book is how people get sucked into there, because any opening or aperture in life, such as the hole in a golf course, the hole in a drinking straw, the door of a washing machine when it's open wide, so it's that circle thing. That's how people get sucked in through those holes into the House of Holes for their sort of sexual pleasure that follows. And I think that's a very nice device. But the novel as a whole is so over the top and so sort of unrelenting, sex act after sex act. It's it doesn't really save it. But that was pretty much the wildest book I've ever read.
Fight the power! Fight the power! We got to fight the powers that be!
So that was Public Enemy, Fight the Power. Which character faced the most overwhelming odds and put up the best fight? For me, it's the author Madeleine Tienne's Dogs at the Perimeter. Now, Madeleine Tienne has sort of come to sort of global notice and sort of been nominated for prizes for writing books about China. But actually, she's Cambodian, and she was a victim of, as a very young child, of the Khmer Rouge. And this book, Dogs at the Perimeter, is about that, and is, you can't get more of a power than sort of a totalitarian state that wants to revert to what it called Year Zero, where it basically wipes out the previous population as being corrupt and sort of starts again from moulding minds of the youth. And there's a lot in the first half of the book about her experiences under the Khmer Rouge and how a rural people was stripped away with traditional links to the land through gods and beliefs and stuff like that, which were replaced by these sort of nonsensical Khmer Rouge sort of communist ones, which are a mixture of communism, Buddhism and nonsense. So that's the first half of the book, and she escapes. And the second half of the book is she relocates to Canada, and she's a brain scientist, and her partner is also a brain scientist. And what's really interesting is they're so broken that they're studying sort of the chemical nature of human emotions, because that's the only way they can relate emotionally, is trying to work out what the chemical reaction is. They've been so stripped back as human beings that all that's left is the brain and what is the chemistry at play in the brain. And it's sort of heartrending that's how she ended up, but it's totally understandable from her experiences. So that was Gangster's Paradise by Coolio. What is the best novel about crime or law enforcement? So for me, this is A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Paz. Now, I'm the son of a lawyer, and I really don't like crime. No, not crime drama. I don't like courtroom dramas. because to me there's nothing you can do with it. They're all the same. The procedures are the same. The details of a case might be different, but basically what you're describing is, you know, the lawyer standing up, the witness, you know, on the stand, the defendant at their table, and the judge, and there's nothing else you can do with it unless you're going to be completely subversive. So on the whole, you know, all that Pelican Brief and all of that, you know, what was it? A Few Good Men? No, what was it? Was that what it was called? Anyway, all that stuff just does not interest me. But Sergio de la Paz wrote, you know, he wrote about being a public defendant in New York. It's fiction. And the first part of the book is basically how it's a meat grinder. All these sort of suspects at the bottom of society have no resources. They can't, you know, have no money to employ a decent legal representation. And it's like a sausage press. Next one, and you know, do they plead guilty, or you know, there's no hope for them. And this guy, the lawyer in the book, does the best he can for these clients, and he's never lost a case where he sort of said, okay, this is what I'm after achieving, and he always manages to get that sort of outcome. And he loses one, you know, his client is banged up, and that sort of sets him off in a spiral whereby he ends up with him and another lawyer basically plotting a crime themselves and carrying out the crime. And it's a very funny book as well, surprisingly. And there's also a lot about sort of the middleweight boxing, when you had sort of so many fantastic boxers like Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, who else? Wilfred Benitez. There are about 5 boxers, and you know, they were all, you know, the fantastic ability, and the title kept changing hands and stuff. So there's a lot about that in it, but that's because he, as a lawyer, was finally lost his undefeated champion belt effectively, and it's just a great book. You know, it is about law and sort of, you know, which side of the law do you come down on, but it's more, you know, it's so much superior to a courtroom drama.
What's beef? Beef is when you need 2 cats to go to sleep. Beef is when your moms ain't safe up in the streets. Beef is when I see you, guaranteed to be in ICU.
What's a Beef by Notorious B.I.G. What's the biggest grudge or rivalry in any novel you've read? Okay, so for me this is the Merceau investigation by Kamal Daoud. So Merceau was the character, was the Arab, Merceau was in Camus' book The Outsider, who shot and killed an Arab on the beach, and then the Outsider is about the justice system that thereafter. This book is a response to that, and it's basically writes about the unknown mother and brother of the Arab who was shot, saying, you know, these are the bereaved, these are the people left behind, these are the people never considered in Camus' book, never talked about. The Arab on the beach, the man who was shot, never has a name. We are going to give him his name. And there's a lot of really touching stuff about, you know, from the point of view of the brother who's left behind. But then it moves into really interesting territory whereby he decides he's going to randomly kill a Frenchman to even up the score. You know, this is the revenge element. You know, he's so sort of embittered and angry by the treatment of the Algerians in Camus' book that this is his response, and he kills a Frenchman. And then it becomes a bit like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. It's like, I've killed one person, but actually I've chilled all flesh for me, you know, so the woman that he likes, he can no longer respond to because he has a different perception now that he's taken life. And his, you know, that changes his relationship to human bodies and flesh and stuff. And it's a brilliant book. So although he gains revenge, it totally undoes him really in the end.
Going insane, insane in the membrane. Insane in the membrane.
Insane in the Brain by Cypress Hill. Who's the maddest or balmiest character you've ever come across? So Christopher Priest's book, The Affirmation, whereby a man sort of has a nervous break. You know, he's trying to sort of preserve his life by writing down memories and stuff. And he has a nervous breakdown, and he sort of retires to write all this stuff down. But, you know, he lets everything go, like he doesn't feed himself properly, doesn't clean himself. The house where he's staying falls apart, and his sister comes and discovers him in this state. She says, "You've got to come and live with us. We'll take care of you." So there's that sort of line in narrative. But then there's what he's written about, where he is a character in a fiction book because he decided that he can't do it as memoir. He's going to turn it into a story, because the problem with memoir is that that character has lots of incidents and events, but no story. And he says, no, I need a story. This is part of the reason he sort of falls apart. So the other narrative is this story whereby he's a character in this sort of fictional land that seems to be based on the sort of Greek islands. And it has a very different reality. That in the story, he believes that at the end of this boat trip through the islands he's taken, he can undergo a procedure that will give him immortality. But the problem is that he'll lose his memories. But he says, that's okay, because I've got this manuscript where I've written all my memories down. And so what you realise, this is like a Mobius strip between the two narratives. So is he the guy who's had a nervous breakdown who's written a work of fiction? Or is he the guy in a different reality who is, going to lose all his memories, but has preserved them in this manuscript, which is the manuscript of the first version of him. So it just constantly sort of, moves between these two realities, and you don't quite know which one to follow as the reality. Maybe neither of them are the reality. In one sense, neither of them are, because this is a work of fiction. It's a very clever, ingenious book.
It's just me, myself, and I. It's just me, myself, and I.
So, Me, Myself and I by De La Soul. Who is the most self-involved or self-obsessed character? Okay, well, Steve Toltz is an Australian author who's written a couple of books that are very funny, laugh out loud on every page. And his second one was called Quicksand, and the character is called Aldo Benjamin, who is a sort of self-described patron saint of statistical anomalies. He's just a mad, wash-up character. And the problem is for all his friends is that they keep having to come and bail him out of these sort of crazy situations. And he sort of expects it. He's so self-absorbed and self-involved. He undertakes all these strange acts and activities as if they were the most perfectly normal things to do, which they're not. And the last part of the novel is basically he's become paraplegic due to his own, lack of care and sort of crazy actions. And he sort of beaches himself deliberately on this sort of rock that's just off the coast. And he's like a sort of sea lion. And he becomes a sort of tourist attraction. Of course, the main character, the narrator, has to sort of, visit him most days and, sort of try and sort of keep him alive and prop him up. And, this character is just completely oblivious of all the people around him that that would have made his life worth living, despite all the disasters, if only he'd let them in. But he doesn't. He just expects them to come and sweep up the mess that he's left, and that's it.
Now I'm in a New York state of mind. Your state of mind. Your state of mind.
So, New York State of Mind by Nas. What is the best novel set in New York, or a version of New York? For me, this is Jonathan Letham's Chronic City, which is the New York novel. So its main character basically doesn't have to work because he was a child actor in a sitcom, and he lives off the money he made as that. And he has a girlfriend who's trapped in space, where the spacecraft that she's on is stuck in a Chinese space minefield. And the whole of New York is gripped by her story. It's a soap opera in its own right. But of course she's writing private messages to him. But he sort of seems oblivious to her, even though he gets lots of sympathy, and accordingly he gets invited to sort of dinner parties and exhibit openings because people feel sorry for him. And also, obviously, people want to know what's going on. He's sort of oblivious. He's sort of put her out of mind. She's not in New York. She's out in space, so it's like she doesn't exist. And that's what the book is. A lot of different sort of, is there life outside of New York? So one of the people that he meets and becomes a significant character in the novel is called Perkus Tooth, who's an ex-music journalist, a stoner, paranoid, and with lots of conspiracy theories. And he's going up and down New York to prove these theories. And again, one of the theories, because it's looking at sort of reality and sort of non-reality, Tooth sort of throws out the question: is there any life outside of New York at all? Which obviously chimes in with this child actor's thing with his girlfriend. And it's a brilliant book. Parts of New York are subsiding into sinkholes. There's also rumours of this sort of giant tiger that's going around sort of being sort of predating on human beings. And, you know, these sort of form part of the conspiracy theories, but it's not just Tooth who believes them, you know, it's the whole of New York is sort of obsessed with them. And the way Lethem brings it all together at the end, and, you know, these conspiracy theories of the tiger and of what's causing the subsidence, and it all just, it's just brilliant how it's all brought together. I love that book and I need to reread it.
The next episode.
Hold up. Hey.
So that was Next Episode by Dr. Dre. What's the best series you've read? I don't really read series. For me, everything I want to know about the main character should be contained within one book, and after that we're done. There's no more to be said. And that's the problem I have with series. So, you know, I have read quite a few Joe Nesbo's books, and his main detective character is called Harry Hole. I don't think it's pronounced like that in Norwegian. It's probably something like Harry Hole. But what bothers me is that each new book, Nesbo has to invent some new character tick or trait in Hole. And you think, well, why wasn't that evident in the first book? So, for example, I can't remember, I think it's the leopard, which comes after the snowman. I love the snowman, which is the first one I read. It was a brilliant story. But that was so draining to Harry Hole that when the leopard opens, he's a heroin addict. And which I can understand that, you know, that makes sense. But it then means that the leopard doesn't work, because in too quick a short order, he's kicked the habit and he's become a detective again. And that just doesn't ring true to me. But, you know, Nesbo obviously had to introduce a new element for the start of that book to move it on from the previous one. And this is the problem I have with series. If he has an addictive personality, that led him to become addicted to heroin, surely there would have been clues to that in earlier books. So, I don't like series on the whole. The Martin Beck Swedish detective series, which was written by a husband and a wife, sort of team of writers, which is quite unusual. I read the last one in that series and I thought, that's great, I don't need to read anymore. You know, that did the job for me and I enjoyed it, but I didn't feel a need to go and read all the others. So I don't really read series at all. So I can't answer that question.
Way it is. Things will never be the same. That's just the way it is. Oh yeah.
That was Changes by Tupac Shakur. Which character undergoes the greatest change throughout the course of a novel? Well, for me, this is Yaroslav Kulfar's The Spaceman of Bohemia, which I've done a dedicated 20-minute video on, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here. But basically, as a child, the narrator is a victim of history because his parents were quite powerful under the old Czech communist regime, and then the Velvet Revolution happens in 88, 89, and the communists are swept from power. So all of a sudden, democracy is ushered in, and his parents are sort of war criminals, effectively, and they're going to be put on trial. But they're killed in a cable car accident, which may or may not be an assassination. And so the kid has to go and live with his grandparents out in the country. But someone who his father tortured under the old regime tracks him down and basically demands reparations from the kid's grandparents, who had nothing to do with the actions of their son. And the kid is sort of naturally traumatised by this. And his grandfather tells him, he says, well, in some books your father would be viewed as a hero. In other books, such as books that are now written under the sort of Velvet Revolution, he's seen as a monster. The trick is not to be in any books at all, to go under the radar, to live a normal life. But the kid grows up and says, no, the only way I can restore the family name and the goodwill attached to it is I've got to do something remarkable. I've got to be heroic. And there's a space expedition that the Czechs are having, and he ends up being the astronaut. That's going to be his great heroic act. And the point about the book is that gradually he realises that actually his grandfather was right. The best thing is not to be in any book at all, not to be a hero, because heroes can turn into monsters, depending on how the land lies. And that's the change that he undergoes. As I say, I've got a full treatment of that in a dedicated video. So the reason I chose that rather than Sergio de la Paz's character, where you have the lawyer defending people who then turns into a criminal, is that although his actions go from one side of the law to the other, he himself doesn't change that much. Yes, he's sort of lost his unbeaten record as a lawyer, and that sort of precipitates a sort of, a change of attitude towards the law. But in terms of his sort of wisecracking and how he thinks through things morally, he doesn't change that much. And I think that's part of the point of the book, is that the two sides of the law, sort of being on the right side and being on the wrong side, are just the flick of a coin, to some extent. So I don't think that character changes as much as this one does.
Get down, girl, go ahead. Cutie the bomb, met her at a beauty salon with a baby Louis Vuitton under her underarm. She said, I could tell you rock.
Gold Digger by Kanye West. Which character was the biggest gold digger, male or female? Okay, for this I'm not going for a novel. I'm going for a stage play written by Sam Shepard called Geography of a Horse Dreamer, which I've never seen produced. I've only ever read it. And it's a beautiful little play. It's a one-act short play. But basically, there's a cowboy in the Midwest. It's set in contemporary times, but he is a cowboy from a cowboy tradition. And he's kidnapped by these two gangsters from the East. And he's kidnapped because he's able to predict the winners of horse races. Even though he's had nothing to do with training the horses or anything, he is able, unfailingly, to give the names of the horses that will win races. And that's why the gangsters have kidnapped him, because they can make money by putting bets on horses that he tells them are going to win. And they keep him sort of, trapped in a hotel room and stuff. And gradually he starts wasting away because he's cut off from his Western roots. And obviously they're a bit worried about this because, the means of income is going to go with him. They don't know what to do. And then one day in his sort of delirium, he sort of starts saying names, and they can't find the names of these horses at all. And eventually they realise that he's now giving the names of racing dog winners. And so they, and again, he's very successful. But at that stage, two of his brothers have tracked him down and turn up to take him home to basically save his life. And it's a brilliant story about sort of greed and being cut off from your roots. And the gold diggers, obviously the gangsters. But it's a great, simple idea, beautifully written.
I got 99 problems, but a ain't one. Hit me. 99 problems, but a ain't one.
And finally, 99 Problems by Jay-Z. Which book has the most plot holes and problems? Okay, so for me this is Solar by Ian McEwan, where you've got a scientist who's very much sort of living on his past glory. He's done no new work. He's actually plagiarised the work of colleagues because he's so eminent. No one calls him on it. And he does these sort of stupid little unnecessary acts of, so there's a handyman in his house who he's unhappy with, and he knows he can't take him on a sort of, physical thing. So he frames him for an act of vandalism in the house and stuff. He's unhappily married. He's on his 5th marriage and they've all failed and this one's failing. So he's a total wash-up of a character. And the book is resolved by basically he's invited to speak in New Mexico at the university on the theories of sort of, solar energy and the threat to the earth and stuff. And he sees this as a way of reviving his career. But what's bizarre is that McEwan tries to bring all these other parties in his screwed up life out into the New Mexico desert so that all the stuff could be resolved, including the builder. And it's just a conceit too far. It's absolutely ridiculous and it does not work at all. So there you have it. There's my hip hop books tag, and it's free to anyone to have a go at. But I'm specifically going to tag Mad Mystical Monk, Madman Rocks and Reads over in the US, and Bald Book Geek. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind having a go, see what you come up with. Till next time, thanks very much.
My dog is bigger than hip hop, hip hop, hip hop.